Hey everyone, today we are going to be doing a big Mac gaming news roundup of everything that's happened in the last couple of months, which wasn't big enough to cover in individual videos, but worth mentioning all together in this new compilation video style. I'm trying something a little bit different, so let me know in the comments if you want me to do more of these in the future. So the first big piece of news is the fact that macOS Sequoia has now been released for all Apple Silicon Macs. So this brings us up to macOS 15.0, and basically there aren't that many headline gaming features for macOS Sequoia. They're kind of hidden in the background. So I guess the first one to talk about if we're interested in Windows gaming on the Mac is the fact that we now have AVX support with Rosetta 2, and you need macOS Sequoia in order to get this working. So lots of games which require the AVX CPU architecture, for example Ratchet & Clank, many of the Yakuza games, now can be played through translation layers like Crossover on the Mac. And it's not just Windows games that can take advantage of AVX. Mac ports like the Mafia 3 Definitive Edition also make use of AVX, and although this runs through Rosetta 2, it wouldn't actually launch pre-Sequoia. If you try to run this on Big Sur, for example, then this wouldn't work at all, but now it's working thanks to Sequoia. But really I'd say one of the big features that people have been asking for a really long time is allowing Mac App Store apps to download to an external drive. So this is coming with macOS Sequoia 15.1 Beta 3. So if I just show you here, this is what I've got installed on my Mac. If I go to the App Store and go to Settings, then there's an option here to download and install large apps to a separate disk. Apps larger than 1 GB will download and install to a disk that you choose. So I can add an external volume here and the game will download to there instead of your internal disk. So this is going to be great because this allows us to download some of the really big games. Death Stranding, for example, is 76.97 gigabytes, so we don't have that double storage issue, and we can now install it to an external solid-state drive. That's a huge improvement for Mac gaming. And this is going to allow a hell of a lot more people to get into Mac gaming, even if you have a base model Apple Silicon Mac with limited solid-state drive storage. Speaking of base model Macs, it looks like there's now been a leak of a photograph of the box of the new M4 MacBook Pro, and it's quite illuminating because this has 16 gigabytes of memory. So if we look at current MacBook Pros, you can actually buy an M3 MacBook Pro with only 8 gigabytes of unified memory. And this leak, if this is a genuine photograph, might imply that the new M4 generation of MacBook Pros have 16 gigabytes as a minimum. So hopefully this is going to apply to all of the base M4 chips in the future, including the Mini, the MacBook Air, and the iMac. But we won't really know until the M4 generation gets announced. Speaking of good news, it looks like there's a bunch of games on Mac which have now announced native Apple Silicon optimized ports. So for example, the rhythm game Friday Night Funkin' is going to have a universal build for Intel and Apple Silicon Macs. The massively multiplayer online game Star Wars: The Old Republic is getting a native Mac launcher. So this will bring it in line with other MMORPGs like World of Warcraft and EVE Online, all of which have native Mac ports. And this is a little bit curious because I didn't think that many people still played this game, but it's nice to see that we're getting a native Mac port in the near future. There's a form that you can fill out to take part in the Mac tests, so I'll leave a link to this in the description. Also, the game Diablo 3 is testing out a new optimized Mac port. So you can currently play this game on its Intel build using Rosetta 2, but it's going to get a Mac native Silicon build in the future. And basically this update is going to extend support for Diablo 3 on the Mac going forward, especially with any new updates to Apple Silicon. And it's really confusing why they've done this for Diablo 3 and none of their other flagship titles. For example, StarCraft 2, Diablo Immortal, which has an iPad and iPhone port already, could easily run on Apple Silicon Macs. And of course we have other very popular titles like Overwatch 2 and of course Diablo 4, which is a way more recent AAA game. So I don't understand why those two games in particular don't have Mac ports at all. How come they're focusing any effort at all on Diablo 3 working on the Mac? Who really knows? But anyway, I'll take the win for Mac gaming. And if you've been a Mac gamer for a long time, you'll know that often we're going to go 2 steps forward and then 2 steps backwards all at the same time. So this story is pretty bad. It's the fact that all of the Mac Resident Evil ports now require an internet connection to start on every single launch. So these are the AAA natively optimized ports showcased and probably funded by Apple themselves, now require an internet connection on every single startup. And if you try to open up any of these Resident Evil games and you don't have an active internet connection, so I've turned mine off here and I'm launching the game, it's going to ask to refresh purchase history. So if I don't have a connection, it says here, fail to refresh purchase history, please check your network settings. And if I press no here, then the game is just going to quit out. This is a huge step back for Mac gaming, I'd say, especially because these games have no business checking on the internet. You should just be able to download it from the App Store, and that should be all the authentication that you need. There's going to be a lot of gamers trying to run these games on a plane, for example, without an internet connection, or their internet might go down and they won't be able to access the game which they paid a lot of money for. And it really seems like Apple should really step in and do something about it, especially because they put so much money and time into showcasing and probably funding these these games in the first place. Speaking of Apple-funded AAA games coming to the App Store soon, Assassin's Creed Shadows is officially delayed until the 14th of February 2025. And this of course means that the upcoming Mac port and the iPhone iPad ports as well are probably going to be delayed until then. Although the App Store entry has not been updated yet, it still says that it's coming on the 15th of November 2024. Obviously this ain't going to happen. And this news is really part of a broader issue with Ubisoft behind the scenes, especially with failed launches of games like Star Wars Outlaws and the fact that they want to go back and polish the game more, and they probably don't want to release Assassin's Creed Shadows in a bad state, which it probably is in right at the moment. So they've decided to delay it in Q1 2025 in order to increase the chance of success for that game as much as possible. It's also going to be put on Steam as well in addition to the Ubisoft launcher. However, it's very likely that the App Store is probably going to be the only place that you can play the Mac version of this game, so just be aware of that. And while you're waiting for, say, Assassin's Creed Shadows to come out, you might want to try Ghost of Tsushima as well, which we now discovered is recently playable on a Mac through Crossover, so make sure to check out my tutorial video on how that works. So next we're going to be talking about Crossover, the Windows game translation layer. So Codeweavers recently released Crossover Preview with an update for Wine 9.17 and most crucially D3D Metal 2.0 Beta 3. So that's now available to use as long as you have an active Crossover subscription. And this technology allows many AAA Windows games to run on a Mac which was never designed to run on it in the first place. Games like Space Marine 2, Black Myth Wukong, Ghost of Tsushima, and plenty of others too. And part of this is down to a collaboration between the company Codeweavers, who make Crossover, and also Apple as well, who developed the game porting toolkit. But one thing that hasn't been reported upon much is the fact that Nat Brown, otherwise known as Natbro, has stepped away from the Game Porting Toolkit team. And this is a pretty big deal because Natbro was instrumental in creating the Game Porting Toolkit. Just to give you a bit of background on who Natbro is, he was one of the first engineers to work on the Xbox in 1999. He joined the Valve VR team from 2015. And in 2019, Natbro started working at Apple. He also said that a major thread of my career is an obsession with platform ecosystems and systems engineering. And this obviously translates really well in the creation of a tool like Game Porting Toolkit, which is all about engineering Windows games to work on a completely different platform ecosystem and CPU architecture. However, in a Discord discussion on the Apple Gaming Wiki Discord server, they've announced here, "I'm no longer at Apple working on graphics and gaming. I really enjoyed being able to amplify and prioritize some of your requests to folks over the last 5 years, but that's about as far up the hill as I was willing to spend time pushing this particular rock this time." So Natbro is still working at Apple at the moment, but they've stepped away from what is presumably the Game Porting Toolkit team. And this is definitely a huge blow to the future of Game Porting Toolkit, which has definitely lost one of its most talented engineers and biggest visionaries. And it feels like a little bit of an indictment for Game Porting Toolkit's future as well, because describing the project as, pushing a rock up the hill is definitely a Sisyphean image. So if you know anything about the ancient Greek myth of Sisyphus pushing that boulder up the hill only for it to roll down over and over again, that doesn't really sound good for the future of Mac gaming. But it's not all bad because this announcement was made on the 20th of August, and since then we've had Game Porting Toolkit 2.0 Beta 3 and also various improvements which continue to be made. So hopefully this Game Porting Toolkit project is going to continue even without Natbro, but this is definitely a huge blow. And lastly, we're going to be talking about how it looks like Valve is developing Proton for ARM. So if we look at this Valve test app, there's a lot of mentions of new tools like Proton ARM64 EC, Proton ARM64 EC Vanguard. These are all very cryptic names, and it's possible that nothing will come of it in the future, but it does seem like Valve are working on a way to allow x86 Windows games to run on ARM64 hosts using something called FEX. And there's also mention of Waydroid, which also allows you to run Android games and apps on Linux-based systems. So it really looks like Valve are cooking up something special for ARM chips, but it remains to be seen exactly what that is. Crucially, there's an implication that there might be some additional work being done to support Windows games running on macOS, but there is no evidence of that at the moment. But really the most exciting part of this announcement is that we could potentially make use of this future Proton for ARM on something called Asahi Linux, which is an open source project to run Linux on Apple Silicon Mac hardware via dual booting, which currently can run many Windows x86 games using DXVK, FEX, and Proton. So presumably if Valve does develop more work on Proton for ARM, then this could potentially be used by all sorts of Mac gamers if it could be run through Asahi Linux as well. And Proton for ARM64 Linux would only help to accelerate more Windows games being run on Apple Silicon hardware. Anyway, that is my news roundup for Mac gaming for the last couple of months. Let me know in the comments if you like this video format and if you want me to cover it again in the future. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.